Picture, if you will, a young shepherd in the rolling hills of ancient Palestine. The year is 1000 BCE, and civilization as we know it is still taking its first tentative steps. Cities are small clusters of mud brick houses. Writing exists, but barely. Most human knowledge lives not in books but in memory, passed from father to son through the eternal rhythm of spoken word. This shepherd's name is David, and he carries with him an instrument that would seem primitive to our eyes. Sheep gut strings stretched across a wooden frame, what we might call a simple lyre. But consider for a moment what this young man is about to unleash upon the world. In his calloused fingers lies the power to create something that will outlast every empire, survive every catastrophe, and speak to every human heart that will ever beat upon this earth. 3,000 years ago, beneath stars that blazed without competition from city lights, this shepherd pressed those crude strings and sang to keep lions at bay. But these weren't merely songs of protection, they were survival itself, woven from terror and triumph in equal measure. Each note that rose into the Palestinian night carried with it the weight of human existence, the fear of death, the hope for deliverance, the ache of loneliness, and the inexplicable joy that sometimes floods the soul when least expected. David had no way of knowing that his words would one day comfort Nelson Mandela in his prison cell, or that they would be whispered by mothers over dying children in hospitals not yet imagined. He could not have foreseen that these songs would be carried to the moon by astronauts, translated into languages that didn't yet exist, or set to melodies in musical traditions still unborn. He was simply a shepherd, singing to sheep under an infinite sky, trying to make sense of what it means to be human in a vast and often terrifying universe. The limestone caves of Adullam became David's university. Here, hiding from King Saul's jealous rage, he carved words into memory that would outlive empires. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But David was not alone in this enterprise. The collection that would become the Book of Psalms emerged from the hearts and minds of 7 different poets, each contributing their voice to what scholars now recognize as humanity's most enduring anthology of spiritual song. Moses, that ancient lawgiver who had stared into burning bushes and climbed mountains wreathed in divine fire, wrote the oldest psalm during wilderness wanderings 1,500 years before Christ walked the earth. His Psalm 90 carries the weight of someone who has seen entire generations rise and fall. The days of our years are 80 years and 10, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labour and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Consider the profound audacity of these words. Here was a man attempting to capture in language the most fundamental human experience, the fleeting nature of life itself. And somehow, through combinations of consonants and vowels, through rhythm and repetition, he succeeded in creating something that still stops us in our tracks 3.5 millennia later. The sons of Korah composed in the temple they guarded, their voices echoing off stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. These were the descendants of a rebel who had challenged Moses' authority and been swallowed by the earth for his presumption. Yet from that lineage of judgment came some of the most beautiful expressions of faith ever penned. Their Psalm 42 opens with words that have become synonymous with spiritual longing. "As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God." Asaph directed choirs with 11 masterpieces, each one a window into the heart of a professional musician who understood that worship was not just emotion, but craft, disciplined, practiced, honed, until it could bear the weight of ultimate meaning. His Psalm 73 wrestles with the age-old question of why the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer, a question that every thinking person has asked since consciousness first turned inward upon itself. Each psalm emerged from specific crisis or celebration, born in the crucible of lived experience. Psalm 51 poured out after the prophet Nathan confronted David about his affair with Bathsheba, a king's heart laid bare before the universe. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Psalm 18 exploded in joy after David's escape from Saul's pursuit, every line crackling with the electricity of deliverance. "The Lord is my rock, and my fortress, and my deliverer." But perhaps most remarkably, Psalm 90 emerged from Moses' contemplation of human frailty as he watched an entire generation die in the desert, their bones bleaching under the relentless sun of the Struving, Sinai Peninsula. Here was leadership distilled to its most bitter essence to love a people deeply while watching them perish for their own failures. These were not abstract theological treatises written in the comfort of libraries. They were field recordings from the front lines of human existence, captured in the heat of battle, in the depths of despair, in moments of ecstatic joy, when the veil between earth and heaven seemed gossamer thin. By 400 BCE, scribes working with meticulous care had woven these 150 separate threads into a single tapestry. But this was not random compilation. They organized them into 5 books that mirrored the 5 books of Moses, creating an intentional architecture that spoke to the Hebrew understanding of sacred literature. The first book consisted of Psalms 1 through 41, predominantly David's voice mapping the geography of personal struggle. The second book, Psalms 42 through 72, shifted to more communal concerns. The pattern continued through all 5 books, each with its own flavor and focus. Throughout this ancient collection, one word appears 71 times, a word that has puzzled translators and scholars for centuries: Selah. Some believe it was a musical notation, others think it marked a pause for reflection. But perhaps its true meaning lies not in its definition, but in its function. It created space, a sacred pause where ancient musicians let silence speak what words could not. In our age of constant noise and perpetual connectivity, these ancient poets understood something we've largely forgotten, that sometimes the most profound truths emerge not from sound, but from the spaces between sounds. The technological achievement represented by the Psalms staggers the modern mind. Consider that these 150 songs were composed across a span of nearly 1,000 years by multiple authors working in different geographical locations under vastly different political circumstances, and yet they cohere into a unified whole. The themes weave together like musical counterpoint, lament and praise, individual and communal, temporal and eternal, human and divine. More remarkably still, they were preserved not primarily through written records, but through the living memory of communities who sang them week after week, year after year, generation after generation. The human brain, it turns out, locks melody and words together more securely than any digital storage device. Neural pathways for music and memory intertwine like the double helix of DNA, creating redundant backup systems that have proven more durable than stone tablets or papyrus scrolls. These songs traveled like seeds on the wind, carried by merchants and pilgrims, soldiers and scholars across the ancient world. They crossed language barriers and cultural boundaries with an ease that suggests something deeper than mere poetry at work. They touched something universal in human experience, something that transcends the specifics of time and place. The shepherd boy who started this remarkable chain of transmission could never have imagined where his songs would travel. From the hills of Palestine to the courts of Babylon, from the monasteries of Ireland to the skyscrapers of Manhattan, from the caves of Qumran to the space stations orbiting our planet, these ancient words have accompanied humanity on every stage of its journey. And yet, for all their historical significance and cultural impact, the Psalms remain intensely personal. They speak to the individual heart with the same immediacy they possessed 3,000 years ago. The fears they address have not changed. We still worry about death, about meaning, about whether we are loved, about whether our lives matter in the vast scheme of things. The joys they celebrate remain constant: the beauty of nature, the warmth of human connection, the mysterious peace that sometimes descends when we at least expect it. As we stand at the threshold of this exploration into humanity's longest-running experiment in consciousness modification through sound, we find ourselves inheritors of a tradition that stretches back through 30 centuries of human experience. Every generation has added its voice to this ongoing conversation, and now it falls to us to listen, to learn, and perhaps to add our own harmonies to this eternal song. The journey we're about to undertake will take us from ancient caves to modern laboratories, from Bronze Age shepherds to contemporary neuroscientists, from the halls of earthly kingdoms to the vastness of space itself. But it begins here, with a young man and his simple instrument, singing into the darkness, unaware that he was creating a bridge between the human heart and the infinite mystery that surrounds us all. When Nebuchadnezzar's armies breached Jerusalem's walls in 587 BCE, the sound that filled the air was not just the clash of bronze against bronze, or the splintering of cedar gates that had stood for centuries. It was the sound of a civilization's heart breaking. Temple singers, those guardians of sacred melody who had spent their lives perfecting the art of worship, grabbed what scrolls they could carry as flames consumed the house of God they had served since childhood. Picture these musicians, men whose voices had echoed off limestone walls in perfect harmony, who had coordinated the breathing of hundreds of worshippers into a single, unified expression of praise suddenly reduced to refugees clutching precious cargo, the songs that had defined their identity as a people. They could not have known that they were about to embark on humanity's greatest experiment in cultural preservation through memory alone. By the rivers of Babylon, these exiles discovered something remarkable about the architecture of human consciousness. The songs memorized in childhood had become more than entertainment or even worship. They had become lifelines in captivity. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? They wept in Psalm 137, their voices breaking as they remembered Zion's glory. Yet sing they did, because something deeper than choice compelled them. The human brain, modern neuroscience reveals, possesses an extraordinary feature that these ancient captives discovered through necessity rather than laboratory observation. Melody and words, when paired, create neural pathways more durable than either alone. Music activates regions in both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously, while language typically favors the left hemisphere. When combined, they form what researchers now call dual coding, creating redundant memory systems that can survive even severe brain trauma. Consider the implications of this discovery. Persian kings, those masters of administration who had conquered from India to Ethiopia, would marvel at how Jewish captives could recite 150 songs perfectly, from memory, not just the words, but the melodies, the harmonies, even the subtle variations that mark different occasions. What seemed like mere religious stubbornness was actually a technological breakthrough in information storage and transmission. These exiles had become living libraries, their minds encoding not just words but entire cultural systems. Every psalm contained layers of meaning, historical references that preserved national memory, theological concepts that maintained worldview, poetic structures that taught aesthetic principles, and musical patterns that regulated community breathing and emotional response. In their heads, they carried the blueprint for rebuilding not just their temple, but their entire civilization. In hidden gatherings from Babylon to Alexandria, the Psalms traveled like seeds on wind, taking root in soil their composers had never imagined. Aramaic-speaking Jews in Damascus sang them with pronunciations that preserved ancient Hebrew phonemes lost in Palestine. Greek-speaking communities in Egypt developed harmonies that blended Mediterranean musical traditions with Near Eastern melodies. Persian-influenced Jews in Mesopotamia added instrumental accompaniments that reflected the sophisticated court music of their captors. Yet somehow, through all these adaptations and translations, the core remained intact. Modern linguistic analysis reveals that psalm fragments found in ancient synagogues from Spain to Afghanistan show remarkable consistency in their essential textual traditions. The variations that do exist often reflect local musical customs rather than theological differences, a testament to the song's ability to maintain their identity while adapting to new environments. When 70 Jewish scholars gathered in Alexandria around 250 BCE to translate their sacred texts into Greek, they unknowingly prepared these Hebrew songs for a journey across the entire Mediterranean world. The Septuagint, as this translation came to be known, would carry the Psalms into every corner of the expanding Hellenistic world. Roman soldiers would hear them in synagogues from Spain to Syria, often without realizing they were listening to the same songs that had once echoed in Solomon's temple. But the most remarkable preservation project was happening in the caves of Qumran, where the Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect obsessed with purity and precision, were creating what modern archaeologists would later recognize as the ancient world's most sophisticated scriptural preservation system. These monks of the desert copied psalms onto scrolls with such meticulous care that when those documents were discovered 2,000 years later, they revealed an almost unimaginable feat of textual accuracy. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave and heard something break. That casual act led to one of the 20th century's most significant archaeological discoveries, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among the hundreds of documents found in 11 caves over the next 9 years, 41 biblical psalms emerged, preserved in the dry desert air since before the birth of Christ. When scholars compared these ancient manuscripts to the traditional Hebrew text that had been carefully maintained by Jewish scribes for 2 millennia, they made a discovery that defied probability. In the entire text of Psalm 145, 8 verses of Hebrew poetry, only 17 words differed between the ancient scroll and the traditional text. 17 words across 20 centuries. The margin of error was so small it fell within what modern textual critics consider statistical noise. This was not accident, but achievement, the result of scribal traditions so rigorous they bordered on the obsessive. Jewish scribes had developed elaborate systems for ensuring accuracy, counting not just words but individual letters, calculating the numerical value of each line, marking the precise center of every text. If a single error was discovered in a scroll, the entire document was destroyed and the work began again. These men understood that they were preserving more than literature. They were maintaining the operating system of an entire civilization. The psalms that emerged from Babylonian exile were not diminished, but enriched by their journey through foreign lands. They had absorbed musical influences from the sophisticated court traditions of Persia, poetic techniques from the ancient literary cultures of Mesopotamia, and philosophical insights from contact with other religious traditions. Yet their essential Hebrew character remained intact, like a river that flows through many landscapes but maintains its fundamental identity. During the Persian period, when Cyrus the Great issued his famous decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland, something unprecedented happened. Many chose to stay, in Babylon, in Egypt, in Persia itself. For the first time in human history, a people had discovered they could maintain their identity without their land, their culture without their temple, their songs without their original context. The Psalms had become portable homeland, a sanctuary that could be carried in memory rather than visited in geography. This diaspora created a global network of psalm-singing communities that would prove more durable than any physical empire. In Alexandria, Jewish scholars were developing sophisticated interpretative methods that would influence Christian and Islamic theology for centuries. In Babylon, rabbis were creating the vast commentaries that would become the Talmud. In Rome, Jewish merchants were establishing communities that would outlast the empire itself. Yet all these scattered communities remained connected by the same 150 songs. A Jew in Spain could visit a synagogue in India and join immediately in familiar melodies, even if the local language was incomprehensible. The Psalms had become a universal language, a sonic passport that granted entry to community wherever Hebrew voices gathered. Modern researchers studying cultural transmission have identified what they call cultural DNA, the core elements that allow societies to maintain their identity across time and space. The Psalms represent perhaps the most successful example of this phenomenon in human history. They encoded not just religious beliefs, but entire ways of thinking about time, community, suffering, joy, and ultimate meaning. Consider what these ancient songs accomplished. They preserved a complete theological system through centuries of persecution. They maintained linguistic connections across vast geographical distances. They provided emotional regulation techniques that helped communities survive trauma. They created social bonds that transcended tribal and national boundaries, and they transmitted cultural values from generation to generation without requiring literacy or formal education. The technology was breathtakingly simple. Human voices, human memory, human community. Yet it proved more durable than stone monuments, more flexible than written laws, more powerful than armies. When archaeologists excavate the ruins of Babylon, they find broken pottery and crumbling walls. But the songs that captives sang by Babylon's rivers still echo in synagogues and churches around the world every week, as alive and vital as they were 25 centuries ago. As Persian rule gave way to Greek dominance, and Greek civilization yielded to Roman expansion, the Psalms adapted to each new context, while maintaining their essential character. They had learned to be simultaneously ancient and contemporary, foreign and familiar, particular and universal. This adaptability would serve them well in the centuries to come, when they would need to cross even greater barriers than those between empires, the barriers between entirely different religious traditions. The rivers of Babylon had taught these songs their most important lesson, that true permanence comes not from resisting change, but from maintaining identity through transformation. Like water that takes the shape of any container while never losing its essential nature, the Psalms had learned to flow into any cultural vessel, while preserving their power to nourish human spirits across every conceivable barrier of time and circumstance. Imagine, for a moment, that you could design the perfect instrument for human consciousness, something that could regulate breathing, calm anxiety, process grief, inspire hope, and connect individual experience to cosmic meaning. What would such a device look like? How would it function? The remarkable truth is that such an instrument already exists, engineered not in modern laboratories but in the ancient workshops of human experience. It is the Psalter itself, 150 songs arranged with an architectural precision that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. The 150 Psalms form 5 distinct books, but like movements in a musical symphony, each section flows into the next while maintaining its unique character. This division was not arbitrary. Ancient scribes were creating something far more sophisticated than a simple anthology. They were building a house for the human soul, with rooms designed for every season of spiritual and emotional experience. Book 1, Psalms 1 through 41, maps the geography of personal struggle. Here, David's voice dominates as he navigates the treacherous journey from shepherd boy to fugitive to king. These early psalms operate like a cognitive breathing exercise, their very structure designed to slow racing thoughts and regulate panicked hearts. Consider Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Notice what happens when you read these words aloud. The Hebrew structure creates what linguists call parallelism, 2 lines saying the same truth in different words. forcing the mind to process meaning twice. This repetition is not redundancy, but technology. It naturally elongates each breath, creating the same physiological effect that modern anxiety therapists achieve through guided breathing exercises. The ancient poets had discovered that certain combinations of sound and meaning could literally retune the nervous system. But there is something even more remarkable happening at the cellular level. When humans speak or sing in parallel phrases, the brain must coordinate multiple systems simultaneously: language processing in the left hemisphere, musical perception in the right hemisphere, motor control for speech production, and auditory processing for self-monitoring. This coordination requires what neuroscientists call bilateral brain activation, a state that naturally produces alpha waves associated with calm alertness. Book 2, Psalms 42 through 72, shifts to communal territory where the sons of Korah, those temple musicians descended from a rebel who challenged Moses, transform their ancestral shame into transcendent beauty. Their physics of praise operates through acoustic resonance. Certain Hebrew phonemes, when properly pronounced, vibrate at frequencies that stimulate the vagus nerve, that crucial pathway connecting brain to body that regulates everything from heart rate to digestion to immune response. The sons of Korah understood something that modern medicine is rediscovering: that specific sounds can trigger parasympathetic nervous system responses that prepare the body for rest and healing. Their Psalm 46 contains the famous phrase, "Be still and know that I am God." But in Hebrew, the word translated "be still" literally means let go or release. The phonetic structure of the original requires a long, slow exhalation that automatically activates the body's relaxation response. Book 3, Psalms 73 through 89, documents national catastrophe with the mathematical precision of lament. Here, 11 psalms from Asaph create fractal patterns where personal grief expands to encompass collective trauma, then contracts back to individual comfort. Modern trauma therapy recognizes this oscillation between the personal and universal as essential for processing overwhelming experience. The mind needs to zoom out to cosmic perspective, then zoom back in to manageable human scale. Asaph's genius lay in understanding that grief requires both expression and containment. His psalms provide structured pathways for emotional overwhelm, creating safe containers where rage and despair can be fully felt without destroying the person experiencing them. Psalm 73 begins with honest spiritual crisis. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped, then guides the reader through a complete emotional journey to resolution and peace. The mathematical precision of this structure becomes apparent when mapped graphically. Each of Asaph's psalms follows the same emotional arc: orientation, establishing baseline reality; disorientation, acknowledging crisis; and reorientation, discovering new equilibrium. Modern grief counselors use identical frameworks, unknowingly following patterns established 3,000 years ago by a temple musician who understood that healing requires both chaos and order, both expression and resolution. Book 4, Psalms 90 through 106, rises into cosmic territory where Moses and anonymous poets contemplate spans of time that make human life seem like morning mist. Here, the Psalms function as what philosophers call perspective medicine. They cure the claustrophobia of immediate circumstance by opening windows onto eternal vistas. Psalm 90, attributed to Moses himself, contains some of the most sobering words in all literature. The days of our years are 80 years and 10, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labour and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Yet this confrontation with mortality serves a therapeutic purpose. Modern psychology recognizes that terror management, consciously acknowledging death's reality, paradoxically reduces anxiety and increases appreciation for present experience. The cosmic psalms achieve something remarkable. They simultaneously humble human pretension and elevate human significance. Yes, we are dust in the wind compared to geological timescales, but we are also the part of the universe that has developed consciousness, language, music, love. This dual awareness, cosmic humility, coupled with existential significance, creates what researchers call spiritual grandiosity, a healthy form of self-regard that neither inflates nor deflates the ego but places it in proper proportion to ultimate reality. Book 5, Psalms 107 through 150, builds to orchestral climax. The word praise appears more times in these final 44 songs than in all the rest combined, creating what neuroscientists recognize as a dopamine cascade that paradoxically calms through completion. The brain's reward system floods with chemicals associated with accomplishment and satisfaction, but unlike artificial stimulants, this cascade leads to rest rather than agitation. The architecture of Book 5 follows the same pattern found in successful therapeutic interventions: systematic desensitization to anxiety through graduated exposure to joy. The early psalms in this section acknowledge ongoing struggles. Psalm 100. 7 catalogues various forms of human distress, but each crisis immediately yields to testimony of divine intervention. The repetitive structure trains the mind to expect resolution, creating what psychologists call learned optimism. But perhaps the most sophisticated element of the Psalter's architecture lies in its treatment of time. Unlike linear narratives that move from beginning to end, the Psalms create what musicologists call recursive time, patterns that spiral rather than march, returning to familiar themes with deeper understanding. A person can read Psalm 23 as a child and find comfort, return to it in middle age and discover new layers, encounter it again in old age and find meanings invisible during earlier readings. This temporal flexibility allows the Psalms to function as what developmental psychologists call transitional objects, sources of comfort that adapt to changing life circumstances without losing their essential character. Like a childhood blanket that remains meaningful even as its function evolves, the Psalms grow with their users, always familiar, yet always fresh. The mathematical precision underlying this architecture becomes apparent when analyzed. Statistically, the distribution of emotional content across the 150 Psalms follows patterns that optimize both variety and unity. Approximately 30% focus on praise and celebration, 30% deal with complaint and lament, 30% offer instruction and wisdom, and 10% address community concerns. This ratio provides enough diversity to address any human situation while maintaining sufficient consistency to feel coherent and trustworthy. Moreover, the Psalms are distributed throughout the collection in ways that prevent emotional overload. Intense laments are typically followed by songs of comfort or celebration. Cosmic meditations alternate with intimate personal prayers. The overall effect resembles a carefully balanced emotional diet, providing necessary nutrients for spiritual health without overwhelming the system with any single ingredient. Modern composers studying the Psalter's structure have identified sophisticated musical principles embedded in the text. The Hebrew poetry employs techniques that anticipate developments in 20th century music. Irregular meter that creates rhythmic interest without losing coherence, harmonic progressions that build tension and release it in satisfying cycles, and melodic patterns that remain memorable while avoiding predictability. But the most remarkable architectural feature may be the Psalm's treatment of silence. The mysterious word Selah, appearing 71 times throughout the collection, creates structured pauses that serve multiple functions. Musically, they provide breathing space for performers and listeners. Emotionally, they allow time for psychological processing. Spiritually, they acknowledge that some experiences transcend verbal expression. In our age of constant stimulation, and perpetual connectivity, these ancient architects of attention understood something we are struggling to remember: that consciousness requires both input and emptiness, both sound and silence, both engagement and rest. The Psalms create a rhythm of engagement and withdrawal that allows for maximum absorption of their transformative content. As we move deeper into this exploration of humanity's longest-running experiment in consciousness modification through sound, we begin to see that the Psalms are far more than religious literature. They are sophisticated technologies for managing human attention, regulating emotional response, building community bonds, and connecting individual experience to transcendent meaning. Their architects understood the human psyche with a precision that modern psychology is still working to match. In the Judean desert, where the sun turns limestone to furnace heat and winter nights can freeze the marrow in your bones, 4th century monks discovered something extraordinary. These desert fathers, as they came to be known, lived in caves, not unlike David's ancient hideouts, pursuing a radical experiment in human consciousness. They had committed themselves to chanting all 150 psalms every week, and what they found defied their own expectations. Their heart rates synchronized, their cortisol levels dropped. Sleep came easier despite their austere conditions. Without any understanding of neurochemistry or endocrinology, these ancient practitioners had stumbled upon what modern science would later recognize as one of the most effective non-pharmaceutical interventions for anxiety, depression, and insomnia ever discovered. Consider the audacity of their undertaking. To recite the entire Psalter weekly required approximately 8 hours of continuous vocalization spread across 7 days. This was not casual reading, but intensive practice, what they called rumination, literally chewing the words like a cow chews cud, extracting every nutrient of meaning until the texts became part of their cellular structure. Saint Anthony of Egypt, the father of Christian monasticism, memorized the entire Psalter by age 20. Modern neuroscientists studying his biography recognize the signs of what they now call meditation-induced neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to rewire itself through sustained contemplative practice. Anthony's contemporaries reported that he could recite any psalm from memory while performing manual labor, leading community prayers, or counseling distressed visitors. His brain had formed new neural pathways that made the psalms as accessible as his own thoughts. But Anthony's achievement was more than memory feat. It was consciousness transformation. Ancient sources describe how his recitation created physical changes that amazed his contemporaries. His breathing became deeper and more regular. His facial expressions grew peaceful even during intense theological debates. Most remarkably, he seemed to require less sleep and food than other men his age, as if the Psalms were providing some form of spiritual nutrition that reduced his dependence on ordinary sustenance. Modern sleep research suggests Anthony had discovered something profound about the relationship between vocal repetition and circadian rhythms. When humans engage in extended periods of rhythmic vocalization, the brain releases melatonin more efficiently, creating deeper and more restorative sleep cycles. The Psalms, with their built-in rhythmic patterns and breathing requirements, function as natural sleep medicine. But the Desert Fathers' discoveries were just beginning to ripple outward across the ancient world. When Jerome received his commission to translate the Bible into Latin around 400 CE, he approached the Psalms with unprecedented scholarly rigor. Working from 3 different sources, Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic texts, he compared every word, every phrase, every nuance of meaning to capture what he called the authentic voice of David. Jerome's Vulgate would carry these songs to Celtic monks on remote Irish islands, where they developed their own remarkable preservation techniques. In the scriptoriums of Kells and Lindisfarne, monks illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, each decorated letter a meditation that took days to complete. But these were not merely artistic exercises, they were memory aids designed to embed the Psalms so deeply in consciousness that persecution could never erase them. The Celtic approach to psalm memorization employed what modern educators recognize as multisensory learning. As monks copied the texts, they were simultaneously engaging visual processing through the intricate letter forms, kinesthetic learning through the physical act of writing, auditory processing through community recitation, and even olfactory memory through the distinctive smells of parchment and ink. Each sense created its own memory pathway, building redundant storage systems that could survive even severe brain trauma. During the Black Death of the 1400s, communities that maintained psalm-singing traditions showed significantly lower mortality rates. Modern epidemiologists studying these records initially dismissed the correlation as coincidence, but recent research into the relationship between deep breathing and immune function suggests the connection may be genuine. The rhythmic breathing required for psalm chanting increases oxygenation, improves lymphatic circulation, and stimulates the vagus nerve, all factors that enhance immune response to infectious disease. Consider what was happening in these plague-stricken communities. While most of Europe was collapsing into chaos and despair, psalm-singing groups maintained their spiritual practices with mathematical precision. They gathered daily for communal recitation, creating what epidemiologists now recognize as social immunity, the phenomenon where strong community bonds and shared practices provide measurable protection against both physical and psychological illness. But perhaps no figure in this long chain of psalm preservation paid a higher price than William Tyndale. In 1534, while hiding from authorities in the Low Countries, he was working on his revolutionary English translation of the Bible. His approach to the Psalms reveals genius that extends far beyond linguistic skill into deep understanding of human psychology and spiritual practice. When Tyndale encountered Psalm 23, he faced a crucial decision. The Hebrew phrase, Yahweh Roi, could be translated literally as, Yahweh shepherds me, or more dynamically as, the Lord is my shepherd. Previous translators had chosen various approaches, but Tyndale selected, the Lord is my shepherd. For reasons that went far beyond accuracy, he had discovered something about rhythm and human consciousness. The phrase, the Lord is my shepherd, contains exactly 7 syllables arranged in a pattern that matches average human walking pace, 60 to 80 beats per minute. This is not coincidence, but profound insight into the relationship between language, movement, and consciousness. When humans walk while reciting these words, their breathing naturally synchronizes with their footsteps, creating the same physiological state that meditation teachers spend years helping students achieve. But Tyndale's genius extended beyond individual words to entire verse structures. His translation of Psalm 23 creates what linguists call semantic breathing. Each line requires exactly the amount of air that fills and empties the lungs comfortably. Try reading his version aloud. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Each phrase demands a natural pause that corresponds to the respiratory rhythm of a calm, contemplative person. This attention to the physiology of recitation was not academic exercise. Tyndale understood that people would be reciting these words. In moments of crisis, when normal breathing patterns were disrupted by fear or grief, his translation functioned as what modern therapists call cognitive breathing cues, unconsciously guiding distressed individuals back to regular respiratory rhythms that promote emotional regulation. The cost of this innovation was everything. In 1536, Tyndale was strangled and burned at the stake for the crime of translating scripture into English. His final words, according to witnesses, were a prayer that God would open the King of England's eyes. Within 3 years of his death, Henry VIII had authorized an English Bible based largely on Tyndale's translation. The Psalms he had crafted with such care would shape English literature for 5 centuries. But Tyndale's influence extended far beyond literature into the realm of consciousness itself. His translation created what historians call democratic spirituality for the first time. Ordinary English speakers could access the places, psalms in their native language, with rhythms and cadences that matched their natural speech patterns. The psychological impact was revolutionary. People who had never learned Latin could now engage with these ancient songs in ways that felt authentic rather than foreign. The printing press amplified this revolution exponentially. Where handwritten psalters might reach dozens of readers over their lifetime, printed versions could influence thousands. By 1550, psalm books were among the most commonly owned texts in Protestant households across Northern Europe. Children learned to read using psalm verses, creating neural pathways that linked literacy itself with sacred rhythm and meaning. In Scotland, John Knox instituted psalm singing as a cornerstone of Reformed worship, but his innovation went beyond theology into social engineering. Knox understood that congregational singing created communal identity more effectively than sermons or theological arguments. When hundreds of voices joined in Psalm 124, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, now may Israel say," they were not merely expressing religious sentiment but forging political unity that would prove stronger than clan loyalties or feudal obligations. The Scottish psalm tradition developed unique characteristics that reflect deep understanding of group psychology. Congregations sang in unison without instrumental accompaniment, forcing each individual to listen carefully to the collective voice while contributing their own part. This practice created what sociologists call synchronized breathing communities, groups whose members unconsciously coordinate their respiratory rhythms, leading to measurable increases in empathy, cooperation, and social bonding. But perhaps the most remarkable development during this period was the emergence of what scholars call therapeutic psalm use. Protestant reformers, lacking the Catholic sacramental system for managing spiritual distress, turned to the Psalms as medicine for troubled souls. They developed systematic approaches for matching specific psalms to particular emotional or spiritual conditions. Psalm 51 for guilt, Psalm 23 for fear, Psalm 103 for depression, Psalm 150 for joy. These proto-therapists understood something that modern psychology is rediscovering, that healing often requires not just understanding problems, but actively practicing solutions. The Psalms provided what contemporary therapists call cognitive restructuring tools, systematic methods for replacing destructive thought patterns with healthier alternatives. But unlike modern cognitive behavioral therapy, which operates primarily through rational analysis, psalm therapy engaged the whole person through rhythm, melody, movement, and community participation. As the Reformation spread across Europe, carrying Tyndale's translation techniques and Knox's singing practices, psalms were becoming something unprecedented in human history, a universally accessible technology for consciousness transformation that required no special training, no expensive equipment, no institutional gatekeepers. A Scottish farmer could access the same spiritual resources as university theologians. An English housewife could practice the same consciousness disciplines as learned monks. The guardians of sacred sound had successfully democratized their ancient wisdom, but in doing so, they had also prepared these songs for an even greater journey, one that would carry them across oceans to continents their original composers had never imagined, where they would encounter entirely new cultures and adapt to circumstances that would test their remarkable flexibility to its very limits. In the sterile corridors of a Philadelphia hospital in 2008, neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Newberg prepared to peer inside the praying brain with a precision that would have amazed the ancient psalmists. His subjects were Franciscan nuns who had spent decades in contemplative practice, and his tools were SPECT scanners capable of tracking blood flow through neural tissue in real time. What he discovered would bridge 3,000 years of spiritual practice with the cutting edge of brain science. As Sister Mary Catherine entered the scanner and began praying Psalm 139, "Search me, O God, and know my heart," something remarkable appeared on Newberg's monitors. The posterior superior parietal lobe, that region responsible for maintaining the boundary between self and world, began to quiet. Activity in this area, which normally fires constantly to maintain our sense of individual identity separate from our environment, decreased dramatically as the nun deepened into prayer. Consider what this means. The brain region that insists, "I am here and everything else is there," was literally shutting down, creating the neurological foundation for what mystics had reported for millennia the experience of unity with something greater than the individual self. Newberg was watching three-dimensional proof of what the psalmists had encoded in phrases like, "Be still and know that I am God," the dissolution of ordinary ego boundaries that allows consciousness to expand beyond its usual limitations. But this was only the beginning of what modern laboratories were discovering about these ancient songs. When UCLA researchers examined Gregorian chant in 2012, they focused on a specific mystery that had puzzled musicologists for centuries. Why did traditional psalm tones, those haunting melodies that monasteries had preserved for over 1,000 years, cluster around certain frequencies? The answer revealed profound understanding embedded in medieval musical tradition. The specific frequency of psalm tones, often hovering around 110 Hz, stimulates nitric oxide production in human blood vessels. This simple molecule, which earned its discoverers the Nobel Prize in Physiology, acts as a powerful vasodilator, opening arteries and improving circulation throughout the body. Within 12 minutes of chanting at these frequencies, participants showed measurable drops in blood pressure and increased oxygen delivery to vital organs. The ancient monks had been practicing cardiovascular medicine without knowing it. Their spiritual exercises were simultaneously physical interventions that promoted health and longevity. No wonder medieval monasteries produced some of the longest-lived populations in Europe, despite their austere diets and harsh living conditions. The therapeutic applications of these discoveries began emerging in hospitals around the world. In Jerusalem's Hadassah Hospital, Dr. Yuval Kaufman documented how terminal patients who listened to psalms in Hebrew showed 37% less need for pain medication compared to control groups. The combination of familiar phonemes and rhythmic breathing created endorphin release that equaled or exceeded morphine's effectiveness for mild to moderate pain, but without the side effects of pharmaceutical intervention. Dr. Kaufman's research revealed something even more remarkable. The pain relief was not simply psychological comfort from religious content, it was neurochemical response to specific acoustic patterns. When the same patients listened to Hebrew poetry that was not psalm material, pain relief was minimal. When non-Hebrew speakers listened to psalm recordings, benefits were reduced but still significant. The psalms had encoded therapeutic frequencies that transcended language barriers, while remaining optimally effective in their original linguistic form. MIT linguists, led by Dr. Sarah Chen, made another breakthrough while studying the acrostic psalms, those Hebrew poems where each line begins with successive letters of the alphabet. Psalm 119, with its 176 verses organized in 22 alphabetic sections, initially seemed like an elaborate literary game, but Chen's team discovered these texts function as sophisticated memory enhancement tools. The alphabetic structure creates what cognitive scientists call memory palaces, organizational systems that allow the brain to store and retrieve vast amounts of information with remarkable accuracy. Even patients with moderate dementia could recall entire sections of Psalm 119 after minimal practice, while struggling to remember their children's names or what they had eaten for breakfast. The implications for treating cognitive decline are staggering. In nursing homes where psalm recitation programs were implemented, Alzheimer's patients showed slower rates of memory deterioration and improved social interaction. The alphabetic anchors provided cognitive frameworks that remained accessible even as other memory systems failed. Families reported that relatives who had stopped speaking would often join in psalm recitation, suggesting these texts access memory pathways that remained functional longer than those used for ordinary conversation. But perhaps the most intriguing research emerged from studies of Psalm 119's unusual length. At 176 verses, it is by far the longest chapter in the Bible, requiring approximately 25 minutes to recite completely. Brain imaging during extended recitation revealed something unprecedented: systematic activation and deactivation of neural regions in predictable sequences. Dr. Elena Rodriguez at Stanford University identified what she called the Psalm Marathon effect. As reciters moved through the 8-verse sections, their brains shifted between different types of processing: linguistic analysis during the first few verses of each section, pattern recognition in the middle verses, and emotional integration in the final verses. The complete psalm functions like a neurological massage, systematically engaging, then relaxing different cognitive systems. The therapeutic applications are remarkable. Patients with anxiety disorders who practiced complete recitation of Psalm 119 showed significant symptom improvement within 4 weeks. The extended practice period provided what psychologists call graduated exposure therapy, systematic desensitization to discomfort through sustained practice in a safe environment. Unlike pharmaceutical anxiety treatments that can create dependency, psalm therapy actually strengthened patients' native coping mechanisms. Even the mysterious musical notations preserved in psalm headings began yielding secrets to modern analysis. Phrases like "set to the doe of the dawn" or "according to lilies" had puzzled scholars for centuries, but ethnomusicologists, using computer modeling of ancient instruments found in archaeological sites, began reconstructing the lost melodies these headings referenced. Dr. James Morrison at the University of Edinburgh analysed acoustic properties of reconstructed biblical-era harps, lyres, and tumbrils, then used artificial intelligence to generate melodies that would have been playable on these instruments while fitting the rhythmic patterns of specific psalms. When test subjects listened to these reconstructed ancient melodies while reading psalm texts, they showed enhanced memory retention, emotional engagement, and physiological relaxation compared to reading the texts in silence. The research suggests that the psalm headings preserved not just historical curiosities but therapeutic protocols, as specific combinations of text, melody, and rhythm, designed for particular psychological conditions. To the choirmaster, with stringed instruments might indicate songs designed for group healing rituals. A psalm of ascents could mark melodies optimized for walking meditation. For the Sabbath day might preserve acoustic patterns that promote rest and restoration. Contemporary sleep medicine has become particularly interested in psalm applications. Stanford's Sleep Disorders Clinic now includes bedtime psalm therapy and treatment protocols for chronic insomnia. The practice of reciting Psalm 4 before sleep, "I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety," activates the same neural pathways as prescription sleep medications, but through natural resonance rather than chemical intervention. The mechanism involves what researchers call cognitive sleep induction. The psalm's content directs attention away from daily worries toward themes of safety and trust, while its rhythmic structure guides breathing into patterns associated with sleep onset. Unlike sleeping pills that can create tolerance and dependency, psalm therapy actually improves over time as practitioners develop stronger associations between the texts and restful states. But perhaps the most groundbreaking research has emerged. From studies of psalm therapy in maximum security prisons, Dr. Marcus Thompson at San Quentin State Prison implemented voluntary psalm recitation programs and discovered dramatic effects on recidivism rates. Inmates who participated in weekly psalm groups showed 68% lower rates of reoffending within 5 years of release, compared to 32% for control groups. The program's success appears to stem from what Thompson calls narrative restructuring therapy. Many career criminals operate from internal stories about themselves and the world that justify antisocial behavior. The Psalms provide alternative narratives, stories of transformation, redemption, second chances, and ultimate meaning that gradually replace destructive self-concepts with healthier identity frameworks. Participants reported that memorizing Psalms gave them something good to think about during the long hours of confinement. Instead of rehearsing grievances or planning revenge, they found themselves reciting words like, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." The combination of memorization, vocalization, and community created what neuroscientists recognize as experience-dependent brain plasticity, the capacity for sustained practice to literally rewire neural networks. NASA's Psychological Operations Division has also incorporated Psalm therapy into astronaut preparation protocols. The overview effect, the tendency for space travelers to experience existential crisis when confronted with Earth's apparent insignificance against the cosmic backdrop, had created problems for several missions. Psalm 8, with its meditation on human significance within cosmic immensity. "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them?" provides a framework for processing overwhelming perspective shifts. Astronauts who practice Psalm recitation before and during missions showed better psychological adjustment to the space environment and less depression upon returning to Earth. The Psalms had taught them to hold both cosmic humility and human dignity simultaneously, preventing the overview effect from triggering nihilistic despair. In Silicon Valley, where anxiety and depression rates among tech workers exceed national averages, several companies have begun offering digital psalm therapy through smartphone apps. These programs incorporate psalmic rhythms into meditation algorithms, discovering that ancient Hebrew breathing patterns provide more effective stress relief than most contemporary mindfulness techniques. The apps track users' heart rate variability, breathing patterns, and stress hormones through wearable devices, providing real-time feedback on how psalm recitation affects their physiology. Users report that 5 minutes of psalm-based breathing exercises provide stress relief equivalent to 20 minutes of conventional meditation, suggesting the ancient poets had optimized their techniques for maximum efficiency. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery has emerged from studies of indigenous communities who have incorporated psalms into traditional healing practices. Amazon rainforest tribes that converted to Christianity often adapted psalm melodies to drum patterns used in plant medicine ceremonies. Both practices induce theta brainwave states between 4 and 8 Hz frequencies associated with deep meditation, enhanced learning, and access to normally unconscious mental processes. Anthropologists studying these syncretic practices found that psalm drum combinations create more sustained theta states than either practice alone. The rhythmic drumming entrains brain waves to therapeutic frequencies, while the psalm content provides cognitive frameworks for processing insights that emerge during altered consciousness. Indigenous healers report that patients undergoing psalm-assisted plant medicine therapy show faster recovery from trauma and addiction than those using traditional methods alone. Even artificial intelligence systems, when fed the complete Psalter, have identified mathematical patterns that escaped human analysis for 3 millennia. Computer algorithms discovered chiastic structures that mirror fractals, word frequencies that follow Fibonacci sequences, and emotional progressions that map perfectly onto contemporary models of grief, processing, and post-traumatic growth. These discoveries suggest the psalm composers were working with intuitive understanding of principles that modern science is still uncovering: optimal ratios for emotional regulation, frequency patterns that promote healing, narrative structures that facilitate psychological integration. What seemed like religious poetry was actually applied neuroscience, encoded in forms that could survive millennia without losing their therapeutic efficacy. As we stand at the threshold between ancient wisdom and modern understanding, the laboratory findings point to a remarkable conclusion. The Psalms represent humanity's first systematic attempt to engineer consciousness itself, to create tools that could reliably produce specific psychological states, regardless of external circumstances. These ancient laboratories of the spirit had successfully created technologies that modern science is only beginning to understand and replicate. Today, as you listen to these words, 3 billion people across 6 continents are engaging with the Psalms in ways their original composers could never have imagined. In Seoul's Yoido Full Gospel Church, 700,000 members cycle through all 150 Psalms monthly, their voices creating what sociologists call synchronous breathing communities, groups whose collective practice generates measurable electromagnetic fields, detectable outside the building walls. Consider the scale of this phenomenon. Every Sunday morning, more humans recite Psalm 23 than inhabit most nations. In languages ranging from Mandarin to Swahili, from Russian to Portuguese, voices join in declaring, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." This is not merely religious observance, but the largest ongoing experiment in consciousness modification in human history. Ethiopian Orthodox priests in mountain monasteries continue chanting psalms in Ge'ez, a language that died as a spoken tongue in the 4th century, but remains alive in these sacred songs. Linguists studying their pronunciation have discovered acoustic patterns that preserve ancient Hebrew sounds lost everywhere else on earth. These priests are living archaeological artifacts, their voices carrying phonemes that King David himself would recognize across a span of 3,000 years. In Sao Paulo's favelas, where violence and poverty create conditions not unlike the battlefield chaos that inspired many original psalms, evangelical communities gather nightly to recite Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Sociologists studying these neighborhoods report that blocks with active psalm singing groups show statistically significant reductions in homicide, drug addiction, and domestic violence. The mechanism appears to involve what community organizers call social rhythm entrainment. When dozens of neighbors gather regularly to engage in synchronized breathing and vocalization, they create shared physiological states that persist beyond the meetings themselves. Stress hormones decrease, oxytocin production increases, and social bonds strengthen to the point where community members actively intervene to prevent violence rather than simply avoiding it. But perhaps nowhere is the Psalm's adaptability more evident than in maximum security prisons across the globe. From San Quentin in California to Pollsmoor in Cape Town, inmates who participate in Psalm programs show 68% lower recidivism rates compared to general populations. The combination of memorization, vocalization, and community creates what addiction researchers call organic rehabilitation, neural rewiring, that addresses root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. Marcus Williams, serving a life sentence for murder at Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana, describes his experience. "When I first heard Psalm 51 create in me a clean heart, O God, something broke open inside me. I'd been carrying the weight of what I'd done for 15 years, and these words gave me permission to believe I could change. Not just pretend to change for the parole board, but actually become a different person." Williams now leads a psalm circle that includes 47 inmates from various backgrounds, gang members, white supremacists, and former enemies who had tried to kill each other in the yard. "When we're reciting together," he explains, "all that other stuff disappears. We're just voices joining in something bigger than our crimes, bigger than our anger, bigger than this place." Neuroscientist Dr. Patricia Faulkner, who studies the Angola program, has documented remarkable brain changes in long-term participants. MRI scans show increased grey matter density in regions associated with empathy and emotional regulation, while areas linked to aggression and impulsivity show decreased activation. We're witnessing literal reconstruction of neural networks, she reports. These men are becoming neurologically different people. NASA's psychological preparation protocols now include intensive SARM training for astronauts facing the ultimate perspective challenge, viewing Earth as a tiny blue dot suspended in the cosmic void. Commander Sarah Chen, who spent 6 months aboard the International Space Station, credits SARM 8 with preventing existential crisis during her mission. When I looked down at Earth for the first time, she recalls, I felt this overwhelming sense of meaninglessness. Everything that seemed important, my career, my relationships, human civilization itself, looked ridiculous from that distance. But then I remembered the words, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them?" It perfectly captured both the humility and the wonder I was feeling. The psalm provided what psychologists call cognitive scaffolding, a framework for processing overwhelming experience without being destroyed by it. Chen continued, the psalm doesn't deny how small we are in cosmic terms, but it suggests that our smallness itself is part of something meaningful. We're the part of the universe that has developed consciousness, that can ask these questions, that can experience wonder. That's not nothing that's extraordinary. In Silicon Valley's hyper-competitive tech culture, where anxiety and depression rates exceed national averages by significant margins, psalm-based meditation apps have become surprisingly popular among engineers and entrepreneurs. These programs incorporate ancient Hebrew breathing patterns into modern biofeedback systems, creating what users call optimized mindfulness. Jennifer Liu, a software engineer at a major tech company, describes her experience. I tried every meditation app on the market, but they all felt generic. When I discovered psalm rhythms, something clicked. These patterns are mathematically precise, in ways that appeal to my analytical mind, but they also touch something deeper than logic. 5 minutes of psalm breathing does what 20 minutes of regular meditation used to accomplish. The apps track heart rate variability, cortisol levels, and sleep quality through wearable devices, providing real-time feedback on how psalm recitation affects users' physiology. Data from over 50,000 users shows consistent patterns: reduced anxiety within 2 weeks, improved sleep quality within 1 month, and increased stress resilience within 3 months of regular practice. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptations are occurring in indigenous communities worldwide, where psalm melodies have been integrated with traditional healing practices. In the Amazon rainforest, Shipibo shamans transpose psalm rhythms onto ceremonial drum patterns, creating what anthropologists call syncretic healing technologies. Ayahuasquero Don Carlos explains, the plant medicines open the mind, but they need guidance to be healing rather than just confusing. The psalm rhythms provide that guidance. They create safe pathways for consciousness to travel during the ceremony. The ancient Hebrew poets understood frequencies that help the soul process difficult truths. Remarkably, both psalmic recitation and ayahuasca ceremonies induce similar brainwave patterns, theta frequencies, between 4 and 8 Hz associated with third of peer, deep meditation, enhanced learning, and access to normally unconscious processes. The combination creates more sustained therapeutic states than either practice alone, suggesting the psalm composers had intuited acoustic principles that contemporary psychonauts seek through chemistry. In war-torn regions where trauma affects entire populations, psalm therapy has emerged as a cost-effective intervention, requiring no technology, training, or institutional support. Syrian refugee camps in Jordan now include psalm circles among standard mental health services, with participants reporting significant improvement in PTSD symptoms, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Amira Hassan, who coordinates mental health services in the Zaatari refugee camp, explains, "Traditional therapy requires trained professionals and private spaces we don't have, but psalm recitation works with large groups and creates its own therapeutic space through collective participation. People who can barely afford food can access healing through their voices and their memories. The practice spreads organically through communities as participants teach family members and neighbors. Within 6 months of introducing psalm therapy at Zaatari, over 3,000 refugees were participating in regular circles. Violence within the camp decreased by 40%, while rates of depression and anxiety showed statistically significant improvement across age groups. Indigenous Christians in Australia have adapted psalm melodies to didgeridoo rhythms, creating what they call country psalms, songs that honour both ancient Hebrew wisdom and Aboriginal connection to land. Elder Mary Janghara explains, "The psalms talk about mountains and rivers having voices, about the earth singing praise. That's how we've always understood country as alive, as participating in conversation with Creator. The Psalms help us remember that all humans share this way of knowing." These adaptations reveal something profound about the Psalms' universal applicability. Despite emerging from a specific historical and cultural context, they contain structural elements that resonate across every human community. The ratios of complaint to praise, the balance of individual and collective concerns, the progression from disorientation through struggle to reorientation, these patterns reflect universal features of human psychological experience. Even artificial intelligence systems, when fed the complete psalter alongside contemporary psychological literature, identify correlations that escaped human analysis. Computer algorithms have mapped psalm emotional progressions onto modern grief models, discovering that ancient Hebrew poets anticipated frameworks that therapists developed only in the late 20th century. The AI findings suggest something remarkable. The psalm composers were working with intuitive understanding of psychological principles that formal psychology has taken centuries to articulate. Their poetry encoded therapeutic protocols that remain effective across vastly different cultural contexts because they address fundamental features of human consciousness rather than surface cultural practices. In neuroscience laboratories worldwide, researchers continue documenting physiological changes associated with psalm recitation. Heart rate variability improves, inflammatory markers decrease, telomere length increases. Cellular indicators suggest that regular psalm practice may actually slow aging at the molecular level. The ancient promise that they will still bear fruit in old age appears to have literal biochemical foundation. Dr. Michael Stevens at Harvard Medical School, who leads the largest longitudinal study of psalm therapy, reports, "We're seeing changes that typically require pharmaceutical intervention, reduced blood pressure, improved immune function, enhanced cognitive performance, but achieved through practices that strengthen rather than burden physiological systems." These texts appear to contain some form of medical knowledge encoded in poetic language. Perhaps most remarkably, participants in psalm studies often report experiences that transcend the measurable benefits. They describe moments of transcendence, connection to something larger than themselves, peace that exceeds understanding. While science cannot quantify these reports, their consistency across cultures, ages, and belief systems suggest the Psalms access dimensions of human experience that resist empirical analysis while remaining undeniably real to those who encounter them. As our exploration nears its conclusion, we find ourselves witnesses to an unprecedented phenomenon. 3,000-year-old songs that continue evolving, adapting, and revealing new capacities for healing human consciousness. The living laboratory of psalm practice spans every continent, every culture, every human condition, a testament to the remarkable prescience of shepherds and temple musicians who somehow encoded universal healing frequencies into portable, reproducible technologies that require nothing more sophisticated than human breath and human community. The experiment continues, and its results suggest possibilities for human flourishing that we are only beginning to understand. As your eyes grow heavy, and these ancient words wash over you like waves on an eternal shore, consider that you are joining a river of voices flowing back 3 millennia. Every night, for 3,000 years, someone somewhere has fallen asleep to these same sounds. Babylonian exiles humming them in foreign darkness, medieval monks chanting them at 2 a.m. vigils, your own ancestors whispering them to restless children, whose children's children would one day include you. The Psalms operate as bridges between waking and sleeping, between finite minds and infinite mystery, between your individual breath and the cosmic respiration that sets stars spinning. In the liminal space before sleep, where logic loosens its grip and deeper knowing emerges, these songs reveal their ultimate technology. They are tuning forks for the soul, calibrated across centuries to resonate with frequencies older than language itself. The shepherd boy who sang to sheep under Palestinian stars somehow knew that human consciousness needed rhythm and repetition, pattern and pause, ascent and return. His words carry the acoustic signature of every emotion you have ever felt, already transformed into prayer before you knew you needed it. In Psalm 23, terror becomes trust. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. In Psalm 103, shame becomes celebration. He forgives all your iniquities. He heals all your diseases. In Psalm 139, hiddenness becomes intimacy. You have searched me and known me. Consider the mathematical impossibility of what these ancient poets accomplished. They created the 150 distinct songs that somehow contain every human experience, while remaining singable by children, memorable without literacy, comforting across every conceivable cultural barrier. Modern artificial intelligence, fed the complete works of Shakespeare, Dante, and Rumi, cannot generate poetry with this combination of accessibility and profundity. Yet Bronze Age musicians, working with crude instruments and primitive notation systems, achieved what our most sophisticated algorithms cannot replicate. But their deepest achievement may be how they encoded hope without denying horror. Psalm 88, the darkest song in the collection, ends without resolution. You have taken from me friend and neighbour. Darkness is my closest friend. Yet even this desperate cry sits within a collection that promises restoration, surrounded by voices that have walked through similar darkness and emerged to sing again. The Psalms refuse to choose between honest despair and stubborn faith. They insist that both are necessary movements in the larger symphony of human becoming. He gives to his beloved sleep, promises Psalm 127. And in that gift lies a mystery. Neuroscience can map, but not exhaust, how sounds shaped by Bronze Age lips still slow modern hearts, how syllables preserved in desert caves still calm urban minds, how songs born from one man's insomnia became medicine for billions. The mechanism operates through what researchers call ancestral rhythm recognition. Deep within your brainstem, neural patterns laid down during humanity's earliest development respond to acoustic structures that predate consciousness itself. The Psalms tap into respiratory rhythms established in the womb, heartbeat patterns inherited from millennia of human mothers, breathing cycles that connect your individual life to the species-wide project of survival and meaning-making. When you recite, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," you are not just speaking words, you are joining your voice to a chorus that includes every generation that has ever lived. The phonemes align your breathing with patterns tested across 30 centuries of human experience. The rhythms synchronize your heartbeat with acoustic frequencies that have comforted the dying, strengthened the persecuted, and guided the lost back to safety. But perhaps most remarkably, the Psalms prepare consciousness for the ultimate transition, death. That final mystery that haunts every human heart becomes in these songs not termination but transformation, not ending but doorway. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones, declares Psalm 116, suggesting that what appears as ultimate loss from human perspective may be profound completion from cosmic viewpoint. Modern near-death researchers report that patients who practice psalm recitation before clinical death show markedly different experiences during resuscitation. Where others describe confusion or terror, psalm practitioners report encounters with familiar acoustic landscapes, as if the rhythms they had internalized during life provided navigation systems for consciousness during transition. The songs had become cognitive maps for territory beyond ordinary experience. Dr. Patricia Morehouse, who studies end-of-life consciousness at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, observes, patients who know the Psalms often begin reciting them spontaneously as they approach death, even when they haven't spoken coherently for days. It's as if these texts provide access to neural pathways that remain functional even when other cognitive systems are shutting down. Their families find great comfort in recognizing words and melodies that connected generations of their loved ones. The Psalms' treatment of mortality reveals profound understanding of consciousness that modern neuroscience is only beginning to appreciate. Rather than denying death's reality or minimizing its impact, these songs acknowledge terror while insisting on continuity. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, begins the most famous passage, but notice that it is walking through, not stopping in, not being trapped by, but moving through darkness towards something beyond. This movement from disorientation through struggle to reorientation constitutes what psychologists recognize as the fundamental pattern of human growth. Every significant life transition follows this arc: birth, adolescence, marriage, parenthood, career changes, retirement, and ultimately death itself. The Psalms provide acoustic scaffolding for consciousness during these transitions, familiar rhythms that remain constant while everything else shifts. Ancient sleep, that nightly rehearsal for ultimate rest, becomes in psalm practice a laboratory for exploring the boundaries of consciousness itself. When you fall asleep while reciting Psalm 4, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety," you are not merely seeking rest, but practicing the art of conscious letting go that death will eventually require. The neuroscience of psalm-assisted sleep reveals remarkable similarities to documented patterns during the dying process. Brain waves shift through identical sequences, moving from beta alertness through alpha relaxation into theta transcendence. Heart rate variability decreases in patterns that mirror peaceful death. Respiratory rhythms slow to cycles that resemble the natural breathing of someone preparing to stop breathing altogether. Regular psalm practitioners often report that their sleep becomes preparation for something greater than rest. They describe dreams where deceased family members appear, speaking psalm verses, experiences of traveling through vast cosmic spaces while remaining anchored to familiar rhythmic patterns, encounters with transcendent presence that feels simultaneously foreign and utterly familiar. Dr. Andrew Newberg's brain imaging studies of advanced psalm practitioners reveal something unprecedented during deep sleep states. The posterior superior parietal lobe, that region responsible for maintaining boundaries between self and environment, shows the same deactivation patterns found in mystical experience. During psalm-assisted sleep, practitioners appear to regularly access states of consciousness that most people encounter only during rare moments of transcendence or near-death experience. But the Psalms' ultimate gift may be how they transform the approach to mortality itself. Where modern culture treats death as medical failure, technological problem, or existential absurdity, these ancient songs present it as natural culmination, cosmic homecoming, return to source. You turn people back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, you mortals," acknowledges Psalm 90, but within context that frames this return as completion rather than defeat. The mathematical precision underlying this perspective becomes apparent when psalm mortality themes are analyzed statistically. References to death appear in 63 of the 150 songs, but always balanced by affirmations of continuity, transformation, or transcendence. The ratio maintains psychological equilibrium enough, acknowledgement of mortality's reality to prevent denial, sufficient hope of transcendence to prevent despair. Modern terror management theory confirms the Psalm's therapeutic insight. Humans function best when death awareness remains consciously accessible but not overwhelming. The songs achieve this balance through what psychologists call death transcendence framing, acknowledging mortality while embedding it within larger narratives of meaning and continuity. Consider Psalm 103's treatment of human frailty. As for mortals, their days are like grass, they flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. This could be devastating observation, yet it continues. But from everlasting to everlasting the Lord's love is with those who fear him, and his righteousness with their children's children. Individual mortality becomes meaningful participation in eternal process. As you cross the threshold into sleep's ancient kingdom, you are not leaving consciousness behind, but entering the deeper awareness. These songs have always pointed toward where every ending becomes beginning, every question finds rest in mystery, and every weary soul discovers it was always, already, eternally held. The Psalms accomplish something that seems impossible. They make mortality bearable not by denying its reality, but by placing it within contexts large enough to contain both loss and meaning, both grief and gratitude, both human limitation and cosmic participation. They teach consciousness to rest in mystery rather than demanding final answers, to find peace in process rather than requiring permanent security. Your breathing slows as these ancient rhythms entrain your autonomic nervous system to patterns perfected across millennia of human practice. Your heart rate descends to frequencies that echo the cosmic background radiation still singing from the universe's beginning. Your brainwaves shift through sequences that connect your individual rest to the vast cosmic respiration that expands galaxies and contracts stars. In this liminal space between waking and sleeping, the Psalms reveal their deepest secret. They are not finally about religion or theology, or even spirituality in any narrow sense. They are about consciousness itself, how awareness arises from mystery, how individual identity emerges from cosmic process, how finite minds participate in infinite becoming, how temporary forms dance within eternal patterns. The shepherd boy who started this remarkable tradition could never have imagined where his songs would lead to space stations and cancer wards, to refugee camps and research laboratories, to smartphones and supercomputers, to your own breathing as you prepare for sleep on this particular night in human history. But perhaps he did know something essential, that consciousness needs music to remember its own nature, that awareness requires rhythm to recognize its cosmic connections, that human hearts need songs to navigate the vast mystery they inhabit. As sleep approaches, carrying you toward dreams where space and time operate by different rules, where past and future collapse into eternal present, where individual consciousness dissolves into the larger awareness from which it arose, remember that you are not alone in this nightly journey. 3 billion other humans on this planet carry psalm rhythms in their breathing, psalm melodies in their humming, psalm words in their memory. You are part of the longest-running experiment in consciousness transformation in human history. The songs that began with a frightened shepherd boy under ancient stars continue in your breathing tonight, in your dreams, in your awakening tomorrow, to a world where these 3,000-year-old rhythms remain as fresh and necessary as the sunrise itself. They have become part of human consciousness now, woven into the species-wide project of learning how finite beings can rest safely within infinite mystery. Sleep well, knowing that your rest participates in the vast cosmic rest from which all awakening comes, to which all weariness returns, within which every breath and heartbeat finds its proper place in the eternal song that includes but transcends every individual voice, including yours. The Psalms have accomplished their ultimate purpose. They have taught human consciousness how to be simultaneously temporary and eternal, individual and universal, fully mortal and mysteriously deathless. In learning to sleep with these ancient songs, you join the great company of all who have ever lived and died and dreamed, all held within the breathing of something infinitely larger and more tender than any human heart can comprehend, yet closer than your own breath, more intimate than your own thoughts, as available as the air you breathe, and as certain as the love that brought you into being and will never let you go.